Hello everyone, welcome to the Chartered Institute of Linguists webinar on Interpreting a Bridge to Cultural Understanding, presented by Nahed Arafat. My name is Sahela Phillips and I'm the Events and Networks Manager. You can post questions on the questions panel, which is just to the right of your screen. And at the end of Nahed's presentation, we'll have some time for a Q&A session. So please could you try and post your questions before the end of her talk. As a reminder, all attendees will receive a certificate and a link to the recording within 2 working days, and CIOL members, you can log this webinar on MyCPD. But for now, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker. Hi, Nahed.
Hi.
Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's a
I'm
pleasure.
going to pass the controls over to you now, and I will confirm when we can see your slides.
Okay. Yeah, can you all see it?
Yes. Okay, over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet all of you, although I am not seeing any of you, but at least I can see the numbers of attendees. My name is Nahed Arafat, and I have a PhD in Translation Studies and Intercultural Communication from the University of Sheffield, and I will be talking to you today about how interpreting can be a bridge to cultural understanding. The aims and objectives of today's webinar is to try to improve your knowledge about interpreting and to try to inform you why understanding the client's culture matters in interpreting settings. I will also try to build your skills to handle dilemmas of interpreting and how you can offer any explanation about the cultural issues. And I will try to give you a little bit of advice about how can you build your skills after you achieve the diploma in interpreting services. So just a little bit about myself and my background and education and experience. I am actually graduated from English literature. And after I came to the UK, I was working with a Black and ethnic minority organization where I was offering a lot of informal interpreting services for mainly Arabic-speaking clients. And I felt that in order to be able to offer the right kind of services and to be able to understand more about the interpreting settings, I needed to have the right qualification. So I did my DPSI in law. And after that, I started working with the Home Office, where I maintain quite a lot of, I've been able to see quite a lot of cases and to build my knowledge around this field quite a lot. Then an opportunity arose when I started working as a transcultural mental health worker in Sheffield. And what does this mean? It means that I was providing and offering a lot of cultural and explanation for health and social care professionals who I used to work with, and try to help the communication between clients, patients, and health and social care professional. So this has actually given me a little bit of interest, and I wanted to understand why culture matters, and I wanted as well to understand, is there a kind of a difference between us as transcultural mental health worker plus versus the interpreters, being an interpreter myself. And the idea was that I wanted to develop training that will develop the interpreter skills particularly in the mental health area. And I focused my attention on understanding the cultural and language barrier that face the health and social care professionals. And as I mentioned, the outcome was highlighted the importance of developing a training for interpreters to develop their skills in this field. And I'm pleased to say that I am currently involved with a project with Manchester University, where they are focusing particularly on training interpreters in order to be able to support health and social care professionals, particularly when they are doing Mental Health Act assessment. However, I felt that I only scratched the surface of the knowledge, and I wanted to understand more about the patient's experience. So I did my PhD, and I focused my attention on 3 communities in Sheffield, Pakistani, Somali, and Yemeni, and I looked at the language and cultural issues facing them when the improving access to psychological therapy, but I focused my attention on the emotional expression and the spiritual beliefs. And through the interviews and observations that I carried out, I became more aware and understand of the importance of interpreting the cultural issues and religious beliefs. And accordingly, I started actually doing a development of a project to try to develop an intercultural communication course for health and social care professionals. And we are currently in the process of doing this to become more kind of frequent. So this is in a nutshell a little bit about my education and my experience. So let's start by trying to understand what is public service interpreting. And I'm sure everybody knows that public service interpreting is any public, setting where the majority of the clients do not speak the majority of the language or the country they are in. And for that reason, they need some kind of help in order to be able to access all the services, and hence the interpreter job is to try to facilitate this communication between the public service providers and public service users. And of course, there's quite a lot of different settings of public service interpreting. This could be, in the legal, and this can be home office, courts, police, different means, businesses, and local government, such as the council, home services, and others. And of course, a lot of attention is going into the health services and the mental health. And of course, each one of these different settings has its own problem and its own challenges of how you can carry the interpreting and how the cultural issues become really important, and understanding it become really important in this field. And of course, we know that there is different types of interpreting. There's the face-to-face interpreting, there's the telephone interpreting, and there is the virtual interpreting, which becomes more kind of common, particularly after the pandemic. Again, for each one of these, they have their own kind of cultural understanding issues, because when you are with a face-to-face or the virtual one, you are more able to see the whole client as a whole, and be able to notice quite a lot of things, whereas when it becomes to the telephone interpreting, it becomes a little bit slightly difficult to recognize some of these issues, particularly because you can't see the picture of the person, or you can't see him directly, so that you can interpret what's going on. Although you can notice quite a lot of things through the vocals and other things, but it is slightly difficult, and it has its own challenges. So let's come now to our main talk, and let's talk about why understanding the client cultures matter in any interpreting settings. As we maybe know, as you all maybe know, there is usually an interconnections between how you use the language and culture. And culture can become a site of struggle over the intended meanings. For example, in therapeutic settings, it is very important to acknowledge the cultural heritage of the patients. Like, for example, what is his expectations of the treatment, how he, his views about his illnesses, what kind of treatment he is using, and his attitudes to any other things. And the new culture. So all of these issues are quite important. And if the therapist just talk to the patients without considering all these issues, it becomes really a difficulty, and the patients might not be able to get what they wanted out of this therapy sessions. Therefore, when we are doing the interpretation in such sittings, we as interpreters can be a good conduit in the communication web, and we can support the service providers to communicate with service users, and we try to help them make sense of themselves by identifying themselves to the clients and trying to understand more about their views. So how can interpreters bridge the cultural understanding? And it is very important to understand this. We usually, as interpreters, we do provide help for the service providers by trying to highlight any cultural differences between ourselves and between the service users, and we try to support these people, the service provider, to understand how they can value other cultures and respect their views. So how can they do this? As we all know, there is, with the cultural differences, there are things which is above the surface and there are things below the surface. The things that is above the surface, it can become really easy to notice, because it's about how you actually communicate, the vocals you are actually using, whether the space between you and the service providers, how you can actually look into them, so that the non-verbal communication, eye contact, space, voice, all of these things are related to our culture and how we use them. Like, for example, some people in the Middle Eastern countries, sometimes they, if they are in a health settings, sometimes, or even in the home office and the police, they might not use direct eye contact, and this is not because to say that they don't want to look the person directly. It could be because they are respecting the doctors, or because maybe they have a bad experience in their back home with the authority, and for that reason they kind of lower their gaze, so that to maintain a kind of maintain a kind of comfort to themselves. So these kind of things you can easily notice. You can easily, as an interpreter, maybe help the service providers in giving a meaning to it. However, what is most difficult is actually the things which is below the surface, such as your beliefs, your values, your perceptions about things, your expectations, how you your attitudes, your assumptions about something. So these are the kind of difficult issues that interpreters sometimes don't know how to deal with or how to explain, or maybe the service providers don't know about it, and it's the duty for the interpreter sometimes to assist the service providers in learning and explaining the meaning of these different cultural concepts that the clients may use during the interactions, such as, for example, their point of view, if they are, for example, in a health setting, and usually the patients may have, the family with them, and why is the family important and why they are bringing them, how, for example, the relationship is important in a family, and how this can affect the behavior, and how this all can be expressed in different ways in the different cultures. So this is something that the interpreters, if the service providers doesn't understand about these things, and the interpreters feel that these are important things that they need to, look into it, so they can help with it. The other thing that the interpreter is actually doing, or how they can help, is that by explaining all these issues, by explaining these cultural below the surface issues, he can help, or she can help, establish a kind of attitudes, because quite a lot of us, when we come to any interaction, we are coming to this interaction with our own assumptions and beliefs and perception about the others. So if the interpreters help by explaining some of these issues, then the service providers will be more knowledgeable and will be more able to deal with the clients and respect them, and also be sensitive to their cultural or religious beliefs, and try to avoid any stereotypings or biases that may privilege the individuals. So we now understand that we all have, it's understanding cultural is important, but it is not always easy to explain cultural challenges to the service provider, because this can be related to the workers themselves, the service providers. There are things that is related to the interpreters, and of course there is something that is related to the clients themselves. The main challenges that is related to the service providers is that they understand sometimes the cultural issue in a specific way, and if you try, for example, to explain these things, they might not accept it, particularly if they don't understand what is the role of the interpreters, because unfortunately, some service providers, they are thinking of the interpreter as a machine that you can actually put on and put off whenever they want, and that their role is just to interpret, to say the words without any further explanations. But we are not going to be going into details, but we might actually come into some of these issues while we're talking about the interpreters themselves dilemmas. There's also, as we said, there's a lot of dilemma for the cultural issue related to the interpreters themselves, which is mainly about the misinterpretations of these cultural meanings, or the lack of experience in how to translate these issues or interpret these issues, which might affect the entire interaction, and we'll talk about these in details in a minute. And then lastly, we have also the issues that is related to the clients, which is mainly related to the trust issues and how they might not be able to communicate with either service providers or the interpreters, which can again impact and decrease any kind of communication and effective communication between the clients and service providers. Again, this is something that we'll touch on it, but now we will mainly focus on the cultural challenges that is related mainly to the interpreters. So one of the major issues that is related to the interpreter is that sometimes they are unable to recognize the cultural norms, or sometimes they lack the knowledge of the symbolic cultural meanings, and for that reason the service providers might lose the right intended meaning. For example, sometimes the interpreters may not be able to recognize some of the concepts, such as, for example, a lot of patients from the Middle East, they use the concept of the heart is thinking, or they are saying that my head is going to explode, and sometimes they use certain kind of concept, like or some proverbs that it is very difficult to be they don't give the right meaning of it, and for that reason sometimes the service providers might lose vital information that will assist them in the diagnosis of the patients. Another issue is that the interpreters might find difficulties in explaining some of these concepts, because there's either no equivalent words to these cultural concepts, or it might not be untranslatable. For example, people in the Somalian culture, they usually, when they talk about their mental health in particular, they use a lot of mechanical devices that cannot be fixed, and to show how ill they are. And if you say it as it is, it might not mean anything for the service provider. And again, it will not, it might cause confusion rather than, giving the right kind of meaning. And casual sometimes, interpretation of these concepts might actually lead to further confusion and non-understanding. I remember, in particularly in this part, I remember that I was in a therapeutic session with a client, with a Yemeni client, and she used the words or the proverb or a concept to talk about her, how she was unable to keep things to herself. And she said the washing robe when full cannot, you can't put any further clothes in it. And if I just said this to the therapist, this doesn't make sense. But what she was trying to say, and she used it from the village, is that her heart was full of agony and pain. And if she doesn't talk about it anymore, she will feel really sick. So you need to understand and try to grasp what is the person really mean. And I remember as well, when I was doing my PhD, the Somali interpreter, when we were asking the person about what does anxiety means to him and stress, and the person said, we don't have stress. He was saying just, I have stress. And the interpreter was quite clever. And he said, yes, we understand that you have stress, but in Somali, we don't have a word for stress or depression. So how do you explain this? So the person said, if you give them, if you give a person, if you ask the person to read Quran, he continue to do this, he will be able to feel, better, and he will be able to run. And if you don't give him Quran, then the angels will run away from him. So again, this is just telling me a little bit about the person, and the interpreters have actually did a very job by explaining what exactly the person means, and it was really, I mean, this if he left this to me like it is, I wouldn't understand what he's trying to say to me, but I understand now that people in Somali associated quite a lot of the mental health issues with with unwillingness and with machines. And this is why he used the way if you are not well, then the anxious will run away from you. It's like a machine going away from you. So this has given me more about an understanding of what is the person says. Another thing is sometimes, interpreters may lack or not understand how they can offer an explanation about the cultural issues, or how they could go to confront the cultural differences. And this is actually a dilemma. And I think this is, you gain the knowledge about it by doing quite a lot of experience and by trying, it's kind of an experiment by doing something and see what comes from it. And quite often, to be fair, in my interpretation, and I'm not going to talk here about mental health, because mental health is maybe, I was a transcultural mental health worker, so I was more respected, but I will talk here more about the home office experience. And I felt that usually when I offer, I always, ask, and I always say to the person, there might be some cultural issues here involved. So would you like me to explain it slightly, a little bit for you, so that you will be able to understand? And I found most of the times, 99% of the times, that the officers were quite open, and they appreciate that kind of help and support. So it depends, of course, on the person in front of you, but there is no harm by offering the explanation and asking the person about it. Also, the other problems in interpreting the cultural issues is the fears of stereotyping people or judging clients particularly when sensitive issues are discussed. And this is again a dilemma, because I remember that there was a lady who was talking, she was in the home office, and she had a big problems in explaining the cultural issues. And I did actually mention to the officer that there is, I think she was, her husband has run away from with her children, and there was a lot of domestic violence involved in the issue, and we were trying to explain quite a lot of these issues. So I did mention to the person again that, you know, we understand that there are certain gender issues in this certain cultural, but I'm not going to actually talk about it in general. It might be quite specific to a certain, you know, culture than the others, or certain individuals than the others. So often try again, we try sometimes to make a generalization, and then we try to say, like, you know, like specifically to this client, things might be different. It's like, you know, when we expect, as Muslims, we might expect our certain religious beliefs that people will follow when they don't. For example, you know, in Ramadan, you expect that most people are fasting, if particularly if they don't have any, if they are not women, you know, pregnant or breastfeeding, or if they are not elderly, or they don't suffer from specific illnesses. So everybody fasts. But to make a generalization and assumption that everybody's fasting, you know, sometimes this can be, you know, a little bit difficult, not right in front of the service providers. And by explaining this further, saying, well, this is usually the generality, but there are some exceptions, and the person might be, you know, following this kind of exception. So be careful about, about these kind of issues. Interpreters also, again, may lack the knowledge about the different political beliefs or religious views and alliances. And this is, again, you know, if you, for example, think that everybody follows a specific, you know, political issues, and you go around, you know, explaining it, and it turns to be the opposite. So just sometimes interpreters can have a difficulty in this. So again, asking the clients, clarifying about it, and understand it, and then try to explain it is another way to go forward. And the most important, you know, challenge of all of this is the lack of any clear protocols or guidance of interpreters of how to deal with these issues. Because as interpreters, we are all taught that we need to be neutral. And by neutral, you should just only interpret what you are actually hearing from both sides. And this is a dilemma that quite a lot of interpreters find themselves in, because sometimes they feel that they need to explain further. And I remember in particular when I did the interpreting course, the conference last year, that there was a lady who actually worked, I think she used to work as a mental health worker, and she was working with a client with the solicitor, but she was working with the solicitor as an interpreter. And she did highlight quite a lot of the issues that was related to the patients to help him, but the solicitor didn't want to take all of these issues into consideration, and that has actually put her in a dilemma, because she wanted to help, you know, the client, but the you know, the solicitor refused to take, you know, all the other issues into consideration, and she was just telling her that you need to concentrate on just telling me the whole story without anything else. You are here just to interpret, not to be, you know, on either side. And this is actually quite a dilemma. And she was asking me about my opinion, and I said, well, I still insist that, you know, I will tell the person and inform them, and at least I will feel like I did my part from this side. And after that, you know, it's I have nothing else to do. That is my advice, would be that you were right to explain all these kind of things, whether the solicitor take it or not. This is something, you know, different, but you can actually write a letter and explain quite a lot of things. Maybe if the person is having, you know, if he's having a claim with the Home Office, you can submit it as a kind of, you know, help. As a mental health worker, you could just do that and submit it as a kind of help. So this is really a big dilemma, which unfortunately, all I can say is experience can tell you how to deal with these issues more than anything else. Again, because we were talking initially, when we start talking, we said that, you know, culture and communication affect each other. And there's quite a lot of interaction between them. There is quite a lot of things that can come into the communication as well, and may disrupt the interaction between the service provider and service users. And the first one is the kind of the interview style. And there's quite a lot of cultural issues that may be involved in how you are actually meeting people, how you're interviewing them, whether it's in a business, whether it's in a work, or even in any different settings. And the different way of how you conduct the interview, or how you may deal with the person, is actually involved quite a lot of and potential cross-cultural issues. For instance, the interpreters, maybe as well, he himself may have sometimes their own assumptions, or maybe the worker having these as well. And there is quite a lot of things related to the character, the personality, and how they understand these kind of issues. So again, as we said, a lot of the issues related to how people interact and contact each other is quite important. And I remember again in one of the settings that with a Muslim woman in the mental health, that she was actually keeping a local eye contact with the person, and this could be actually interpreted as the lady's having symptoms of depression or anxiety, when she was actually maybe doesn't want to have a direct contact, and she was respecting the person. So understanding and explaining a little bit of these issues sometimes can help these service providers. Again, the way the questions are asked, and this is very, very important, because how you put the questions and how you ask them is important. And sometimes service providers, they ask the question in a specific way because they wanted to elicit a specific kind of response. But however, if you as an interpreter ask the question in this way, it will be sometimes looked at as rude or is not appropriate, and you try to modify the question slightly in order to make it more understandable to the person. The most important things in this kind of situation is to have a kind of a conversation with the worker, to know what is the things that you can actually change a little bit, and the things that you can't, and it is asked in a specific way in order to elicit a specific answer, because this was one of the issues that when we were doing the training for health professionals, they were accusing the interpreters of sometimes changing the way the questions are asked, and this might, affect the kind of response they wanted. So if there has been a conversation initially between the service provider and the interpreters, and there were certain things that highlighted initially, so that the interpreters will know more about it, that would be really good. Although sometimes in languages are different, and sometimes you have to play a little bit with the language in order to be able to elicit certain kind of responses. Body language and nonverbal communication, as we talked, play a big impact on these issues, and how the eye contact, the smile, all of these kind of things can affect the person. Again, the trauma and previous experiences which we may share with the person, and particularly if you understand quite a lot of the trauma of the refugee and asylum seeker, for example, and you can relate to these kind of things, although it is kind of developing your knowledge about these things, but just be careful about it when you try to interpret these issues to the service providers, because it might come as your own opinion rather than anything else. So make sure that it is actually said by the person and informed, but it does give you quite a lot of information. Again, when you create an environment where the service users are able to express their feelings of insecurity, anger, and frustration, and try to understand these and try to kind of know how to explain it, because sometimes people are loud not because they are allowed, but it is because it is their language. But sometimes it is understood by the service providers that the person is really angry. One lady told us one story. It's about a Polish person who they've taken her child from her, and she didn't understand why, and she wanted to understand more about it. So she was talking. Of course, she was angry. Of course, she was, frustrated. And but at the same time, she wanted to understand. But apparently, it was her culture. This is the way she talked, and this is the way the language is said. So it's very important to understand these issues and try also to inform the person about it, the service providers about it. Try to listen carefully to service users' stories and be non-judgmental. And here we talk about being neutral, and it's very important to be neutral when you listen to the service providers' stories, and try to be their voice by informing the service provider exactly what they are saying, whether you believe in what they are saying or not, because this is very important. Quite a lot of time, and I'm talking about myself as well, is that we are in an interpreting settings, and we have a specific kind of belief or views about certain things, and naturally sometimes we feel, oh, the person is lying, or the person is not making something right, or he is just telling something which is, it doesn't exist in our culture. It's not your role here. Your main role is actually to be the voice of the person without giving any judgments. And finally, make service users feel comfortable to build an environment of trust. And this is a very important issue in all, kind of interpreting, is how you build a rapport with the client is very important. And from my own experience, sometimes just by smiling to the person, just by being empathetic to the person and feeling with him, trying to assure the person that you are going to be, saying everything you want, I felt that this can establish trust between the person, no matter whether you are from the same community culture or if you are from a different kind of community. If you are feeling empathetic with the person, and if you are assuring the person that you are here to help him, and that you are really caring about him and very sensitive, will definitely boost the client's confidence in you, and this will allow them to open up, and the communication between them and the service users will be really in their good welfare. So finally, how you can build your skills to communicate effectively with the service users and professionals, particularly we are talking here specifically into the cultural issues. First of all, you have to learn special techniques, and by special techniques here, we talk about, how you acquire an observation skills in order to be able to notice what is going on. How is the client is behaving, how he is talking, how he is doing certain things, and try to understand all of these issues in order to be able to give the right kind of pictures, full pictures about the person. Secondly, you have to learn the specialist techniques, specialist terminology and their equivalents, or how you at least can go around difficult concepts or difficult, words that may not that might not be in English, for example, or in the language you are interpreting in. So try to understand these kind of issues. Try to be knowledgeable in both languages, the client's concepts and the service provider's concepts, in order to be able to build that kind of better kind of relationship. Be aware of the cultural approaches. For example, you have to avoid stereotyping because and it's one of the difficult things to do, but try to avoid any stereotyping. And as I said, when you talk about these issues, try to talk about it in general before you come to the specific that it might be related to the person, and make sure if you are unaware, if you are not sure about something, do ask for clarification. Try to avoid any cultural conflict. And by cultural conflict, we mean is that when my beliefs, my values, my kind of, views are quite different from the person, from the service provider, or even from the service users, and try to make a clarification, try to understand, ask the questions in order to avoid any kind of conflict between you and the person. Try to avoid cultural blindness, because cultural blindness usually happens if, for example, the person thinks that, the race and culture make no difference, and they try to see, apply the dominant cultural, approaches without actually considering that, these people from this specific different background, they need something specific. Try to be able to understand all the cultural, issues. Try to be do not have any prejudices against people. Don't feel like, these people are low and I am better or anything like that. Treat all people as equal, and remember, you are there to make a better kind of connection between the two people. Try to have an emotional intelligence and self-care. Quite a lot of interpreters, they come into the field of interpreting through passing through similar kind of conflict like their service users. So, and by listening to a lot of the trauma and by listening to a lot of the things that they are passing through, they sometimes can affect the communication and their action, and things can stop completely during any kind of communication. Try to have a knowledge of the about the interpreting settings. I always have like particularly now that with the home office we do the interpretation virtually, so this allows us to enter into the meeting slightly 5-10 minutes earlier, and I always ask about what is the patient, what is the client's nationality, what is the case about, what is the main issues, and try to have a better knowledge about it, whether it's a political issue, whether it's a religious issue, so that even in this case that you will become more kind of ready. Because with the Arabic community in particular, we have a number of different kind of cultures and languages and also political and religious issues. So by trying to understand a little bit about this will be really good. Again, we said to be the voice of the service users, and also to understand quite a lot about how to avoid making any judgment about the service users, and to try to show understanding and being reflective. And this is a very important point of being reflective. I remember I have been with the home office interpreting, and the person there, he was speaking the same language, and whenever I start delivering and interpreting, he would just kept on correcting and saying, oh, I did say this is what it means in English. So it comes to a point, because sometimes you use a specific word because it is much better, and I kept saying, well, I'm using this word because it's much better to inform about your case, and I will explain this to the service provider. However, the officer become really unsure who is saying what, and at some point I did say to the person, if you don't need me, then I will let you carry on the interpretation without me. And I did actually tell this to the service provider, to the officer, who actually said to the person, look, if you're really able to communicate, this is what we will do. We will terminate the use of the interpreter, and we will build it anew. So sometimes, but this has made me reflective. This made me to review this case again and see whether did I do anything wrong. So just be, try to be reflective on your practices. Also be very careful of the nonverbal signs. Sometimes your own nonverbal signs in these settings can actually have a bad impact or a big impact on the service users, and it is sometimes quite difficult to please everybody, but you will have to do it. I remember again in a home office session, there was a client who, when I was looking at him, and trying to make a focus and in order to take in everything. He felt he was intimidated by that. So he said, he kept saying to me, why are you looking at me like this? And I said, okay, fair enough, I'm not going to look. And when I actually took my gaze away from him, he started to say, why you are ignoring me? So that was actually an issue for me. So I did actually inform the officer, and I said, well, look, if I look at him, he's just saying that I am gazing at him. If I'm not looking, then, you know, it depends quite a lot sometimes on the service providers being very understandable to you as well and helping you. And we managed to actually clear the air towards the end, but these can be quite challenging. So be careful again of your you know, non-verbal you know, body non-verbal and body kind of like reaction to what is going on in the setting, because it can tell the person quite a lot, and whether you are interested or you are not, or whether you are actually believing them or not. And this can also impact on the relationship with the clients. And finally, learn how to interpret the words, the bad words, because you know, you use them in court, you use them in the police, you use them in prison, and there's no harm. Even in mental health, we use the clients used you to actually use them, and you need actually to say it sometimes the way it is said. It can have some kind of cultural connotation to it, and you will need to explain it as well if you needed to. And again, continue with your CPD training. It's your way to improve your skills and be a good interpreter. These are some of the useful references and resources that you might actually find helpful, and it can tell you how you can bridge these kind of issues. And I hope you have you know, enjoyed the talk, and I am available for any questions, please.
Sure, Nahed, thank you so much. So to start with, why does telephone interpreting still exist? Can it be replaced by video calls or face-to-face?
I think why does it exist? It's because, you know, sometimes you don't need a lot of, you know, sometimes it's just you wanted to clarify something very quickly with the interpreters, and sometimes you are unable to find an interpreters, you know, that can come to face-to-face or can come, you know, as virtually, and it needs, you need to look into it. So I think this is why, you know, telephone interpreting is still used. I know that quite a lot of Asians have started using virtual instead of the telephone, but I think it is also cheaper to be used, the telephone interpreting, unfortunately, although it's not the ideal kind of service, but I think these are the main reasons why it still exists.
Okay. Do you let the client know what you're going to explain to the service provider?
And if I'm going to be talking about myself, I always do. I always explain to the person, like, you know, if I specifically, if when the person say to me, for example, oh, you know how is our culture is, you know how is, you know, we are looking into these kind of things. So I will clarify by the person first what he means by these things, because I don't want to make any assumptions. And if, for example, the client has actually agree on my assumption, basically, I will just let the person say, well, I'm going to actually explain this to the, you know, to the service providers, because I think they need an explanation of what is going on between us, and also because I will say that will help the person understand more about what's going on. And I find this way, whether I do it by, you know, with the service provider or the service provider, that has been really helpful in most of the communication.
Okay, thank you. What happens if the interpreter doesn't have any cultural awareness?
What happens? It depends on the kind of situation or setting he's in. If, for example, the setting doesn't need any cultural, you know, further explanation, I would say, maybe you can go away with it. But I will always say that, you know, interpreters need to have a cultural awareness, because how you say things, how you talk about things, how you explain things, how you feel about it. As we said, you know, the below surface things is very important. It affects the communication. As I said, language and, you know, culture and language use are actually interaction, and you can't do one without the others. So it can cause a lot of problems. As I said, like, you know, with the example that I gave about the Somali people, when they are talking about, you know, explaining quite a lot of things, like a mechanical device, and it will leave the person, you know, the other person thinking, why is the person talking about a car here? I didn't ask him about a car, you know. And if the interpreter doesn't understand this, then it is there will be a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication, and there might be quite a lot of problems here.
Okay. Judgmental bias can also be linked to how accurate interpreting might be delivered. How do you see this important element in PSI?
You mean the prejudices? How it is? Can you repeat the question again?
So judgmental bias,
Yeah,
is linked to how accurate interpreting might be delivered. How
yeah.
do you see this important element in PSI?
Oh, it's very important. It's very important because, you know, as I said, it is if this is your own judgment of the issue, you should always point that and highlight it. Otherwise, as I said, it will cause quite a lot of problems. Unfortunately, service providers quite a lot of time, you know, are dependent on your judgment as an interpreter. So you have to be very careful about it. And if you are unsure, don't give any opinion. So that to avoid any biases in your judgment. Because if you, for example, said that, oh, the person, for example, is I'm trying to think about a good example of that. Like say, for example, the relationship between the clients and their families, and sometimes there's a kind of power relations between them, and you are giving a judgment which is not right, and this is something that will affect the interaction between the service users and the service provider. Then in this case, I will say that always ask, always clarify, is this the case or not, to avoid any judgmental biases. Don't just give your opinion just like that. Try to understand it from the service provider's perspective before you interpret it.
Okay, thank you. There has recently been a tragic case in Rochdale where a young child died because of mould in a flat, which was not dealt with. It has been indicated that there were communication problems between the family and the housing association. What are your thoughts? Could an interpreter have helped the service provider and the service user to have avoided this situation?
Well, this actually, this is a big dilemma, as I said, where the interpreters sometimes, as a conduit of the interaction between service providers and service users, where they feel that they are neutral, and their role is just to interpret what each side say. And sometimes if the interpreter feel that this is a big problem and he doesn't want to deal with any of these issues, and he just wanted to do his work with just interpreting what is said between the two, to avoid any consequences. So sometimes, as I said, this can lead to this kind of problem, as you're saying, because, as I said, the protocol and guidance that the interpreters are always told is just to be neutral. But there is no indication of what this neutral means and when I can interfere and when I can't. Another problem, again, is that it sometimes maybe, as I said, the interpreters may have actually acted on behalf of the, as an advocate on behalf of the clients, but it could be that the service users do not want to listen, as I mentioned with the case with the person with the solicitor. So sometimes the service users are the ones who doesn't want to act on what they are said, and it is easy to blame one another rather than actually trying to get to the roots of the problem. So and I unfortunately interpreters sometimes are in the middle of all of this, and sometimes they are the one who get the blame when they are not actually responsible for anything. It's like when I am actually doing the interpretation with the Home Office, and quite often there is a lot of information that is told that the officers try to, during the big interview, try to rectify it and understand it and ask about why the person lied or why the person said this and that. And it's always, there was no one case of my interpreting career with the Home Office for almost 12 years that the person said that, oh, I made a mistake, for example, or maybe the officer didn't understand. But it was always the case that, oh, the interpreter was the one who made the mistake. They didn't listen to me. They were from a different dialect. They couldn't understand me. I did say this, but they didn't. Of course, because they were worried. Maybe they are worried to say anything. So unfortunately, in this case, even if the interpreter was really ready to help and step further step in the work, maybe the service providers does not want to help, or the kind of help they are able to provide is limited. So unfortunately, in this case, sometimes you can be this kind of tragic issues happening.
Sure. Okay. We've just got time for 2 more questions. How do you proceed when the client deviates from the session and tries to establish a personal conversation with you as the interpreter?
This is something that, you know, we are always faced with, and usually clients, because I do understand this, because sometimes if you are, particularly if you are in an asylum seeker refugee who hasn't been seen somebody for time and they just wanted to, you know, initiate a conversation with you, and I always say to the person at that time, I'm sorry, I can't, you know, take quite a lot from you, because I am here to interpret and help you. And I will also explain straight away to the service providers that the patients, you know, people have come to this country, they are, you know, they haven't seen somebody who can speak their language or background, or they are from the same background for quite some times, and they are so happy that they are finally able to meet with somebody. So for that reason, the person is trying to make a conversation. I found this in itself is quite helpful usually, particularly if the officer wanted to know more information or to have more information from the person, and if they are really wanting to help, and if, for example, the conversation between you and the person, the service users, is going to help. So sometimes they will say, okay, as long as you tell me everything that is happening, that's fine. And this is my way of interpreting. I will always say everything that the person's saying to me, and I will say it to the service provider. So in this way, you make yourself clear to both of them.
Okay, lovely. And then just to finish off, how does a certain level of emotional intelligence facilitate PSI?
Oh, it's very important to be able to control your emotions. I know that sometimes it's very difficult. I have been in a situation where it was really, really difficult, and you can't help it sometimes, but it's very important to maintain your emotional intelligence, self-care, because I have been in an interpreting session with an interpreter present, and she was interpreting for a client. In fact, the client was fine. She was talking about, you know, her issues, and she was fine. She was a little bit sad, but she was fine. But the interpreter, you know, couldn't actually maintain her emotions, and she started sobbing, not just crying, which meant that we'll have to cancel the therapy, and we'll have to, arrange for another day, and that has actually impacted on the client. And for that reason, we said that if we wanted to continue, we'll have to actually book another interpreters, because we will be unable to dig deeper into their clients' emotions if the interpreter is going to actually cry every time we meet with the client. So it is very important to acknowledge your emotions, to try to control it, learn, this doesn't come from day one when you start your interpreting. It comes by experience. The more you do the interpreting, the more you are exposed into these kind of situation, the more it's better. And the most important thing is that if anything happens like that, try to always find a way to debrief. And unfortunately, debriefing is not given, or is not provided for freelance interpreters. You need to find a way of talking about your emotions, or try to get things out, because otherwise you will not be able to be successful in your career.
Okay, well, thank you so much for an insightful talk, Nahed, and for sharing your experiences. Thank you to everyone who joined us today and for your questions. I will now close the webinar.
Okay then. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.